take all of these subsidies away from the system, you'll find that the economy moves towards total equilibrium. Unfortunately, political expediency and economic reality are different, and you cannot do certain things in an electoral cycle. The 5 vulnerable economies, 5 vulnerable currencies in the world today are economies that are moving towards elections, and that's the unsustainable part of democracy, but we'll leave that for now. But the reality is that this thing calls for adjustments, and those adjustments, whether we like it or not, will benefit the people in the long run and benefit the states. Let us take, for example, if you were to eliminate the subsidy on petroleum products and substitute it with something else, say health, you shift it from consumption subsidies to production subsidies. What will happen is that the federal government budget of 4.9 trillion naira, about another 1.7 or 2 trillion naira will increase, and the states will get more money. If you adjust the exchange rate by, let us say, 5%, it means that what you get as your state revenue and what you get as your federal revenue is you multiply this new exchange rate by the dollar amount and you get more. So all of these things lead to a major increase in government revenue. But the government revenue increase when there's a trust deficit, when the people do not believe that the government is delivering on their promises, becomes a real issue. So this is the picture as we see it. And so if oil prices drop, I've already dealt with that. Now this is this picture of the states of Nigeria. And you can see very clearly their statutory allocation. Total statutory allocation is state allocation is about 154 trillion or whatever it is, 154 billion, and the state, federal government gets 242 billion. And you go each state and you can find the figure here that Taraba state is 2.85 billion in a month, Yobe state is about 2.83, Lagos state is about 4.13, Delta state is about 23 or something like that. Now, so you can see the fault lines as how the states are, how much revenue they get, and I'm coming back to the internally generated revenue, which is another issue. But basically, you're asking yourself, what are the multiplier effects? Government revenue, investments by companies, and consumption by people. That is what drives it. Now, what's the outlook? Nigeria has a GDP of $305 billion. At the end of this month, the rebasing has been concluded. You will get a GDP of $425 billion. It will be the largest economy in Africa. But the reality is that when you wake up on the 1st of April, and it's not April 4, you have to ask yourself, they say your GDP per capita is now $2,700 as against $1,600 the previous day. Are you going to feel happier? So again, we don't want an April Fool GDP issue. We want a reality, okay? Now, you'll be the largest economy in Africa ahead of South Africa. But what is important? Your potential GDP is going at 10.6, while your real GDP is going at 6.8. Oil is 12.5% of GDP. Now, if your real GDP is 6.8 and your potential is 10.6, it means that you are producing suboptimally, right? And what are the fastest growing sectors here? Telecom, 24%, building and construction, 14%, hotels and restaurants, 13.6%, trade, 9%, agric, 5%. Informal economy is 35% of the GDP, and it's growing at a slower pace. So what are you going to do to increase this productivity and make people happy? In all of this, the income inequality, see, that's the GDP per capita, $1,699. We have 2% of the world, 2.43% of the world's population, but we produce only 0.18 of the world's output. In other words, we are what you call global parasites, okay? Now, your share of world investment is 0.44, and your share of exports is 0.52, while you have 2.43% of it. And 48.8 means that the higher this figure, if this figure is 1, it means that everybody has the same income. When there's high income inequality in a country, and then you go by regions, you'll find that the level of crime, kidnap and ransom, the level of dysfunctional behavior increases. Because you have to ask yourself, what makes people unhappy? Is it poverty? Is it inequality? Or is it lack of opportunity? So these are the issues. And without addressing these issues, you can produce all you want, but people will be unhappy. And if people are unhappy, then there's a proneness towards instability. Now, What are you going to see in 2014? Fiscal revenues as a percent of GDP will be 8.4%, and revenues will decline by 14% because of what has been explained. Fiscal expenditures as a percent of GDP will be 11.6%, and your excess crude account is down to $2.1 billion. Your balance, your deficit will be 3% of GDP, or it will, in fact, go lower when you have your rebasing. Exports will be $99 billion, oil and gas is 90% of it, and imports are $56 billion. External reserves as of this morning is $38.8 billion. The peak was $62 billion. National savings is 20%, inflation is 8%, and unemployment national is 30%. But when you break it out, unemployment, youth unemployment and urban unemployment takes you closer to 38%. However, what you measure is what we call the misery index. The misery index is inflation plus unemployment. If that is above a particular threshold, people are unhappy. Even if they're not saying it, they are unhappy. And their propensity to rebel and have mass violence is much higher. So you have to look at the misery index. Nigeria's median age is 18 years. The world as a whole has 38 years. So you have young, unemployed, and miserable population. Now, what are we seeing in 2014? One, GDP, according to the IMF, GDP will grow by 7.3%. Year-end inflation will be 7%. Oil prices will be lower, and fiscal buffers will dwindle. Our view is that GDP will grow by 7.28 and 5% after rebasing. Our year-end inflation projection is 11%. We don't believe that inflation will be 7 or 8%. Why? Because the price of gas has gone up from $1 to $1.50. In a few weeks, the tariff on cars are going up from 20% to 70%. Tariff on buses will go from 20 to 35%, and those will reflect in prices. Oil price will decline, and the buffers will reduce. That's our view. Well, what will happen when Nigeria rebases? On March 31st, you'll be at $425 billion. Your redistribution of the sectors will change, and agriculture will drop from 40% to 25% because, telecoms will go from about 8% to almost 20% because in 1990, when we rebased, we had only 400,000 lines. Now we have over 100 million lines. So, what's the transition we are going to see from a commodity-dependent economy to a mixed reliance on diverse sectors? So, agriculture is subsistence, moves to missionary, subsistence when you feed yourself, missionary when you feed your community, and commercial when you feed the world. That transition is taking place. Dr. Additional is doing a great job out there in mobilizing the views and putting structures in place. So this is the highest contributor to GDP. It employs more people, and it also keeps people. But don't forget, Nigeria is now having a 53% urbanization rate. Urbanization means that people are moving from the rural area to the urban areas. Or some rural areas are becoming urban areas. So even if they don't move, urbanization is catching up with them. Now, agriculture accounted for $1.3 billion of the $2.6 billion earned in non-oil exports. So even though the output is increasing, the value of the exports is not going anywhere because commodity prices are declining. Now, structure and economics of the business, highly fragmented, and all the experts have talked about. I'm not going to waste your time on it. Now, let us look at what we are seeing for states. In terms of state sector output dominated by oil and gas, you can see it here. I think number one here is rivers, Akwa Ibom, the usual suspects. And then there's zero oil all the way here. Now, crop production, Niger State, Benue State, Kaduna, Sokoto, Zamfara, and all the way. Then the oil states, I think Delta is somewhere up there. Wholesale and retail trade, Lagos, FCT, rivers. So, again, oil is produced in the Delta, shared in Abuja, and spent across the land, right? Now, so this is mining and quarrying. This is wholesale and retail. Mining and quarrying, Bayelsa small. The biggest one here is Edo State. For wholesale and retail trade, among the states, rivers number one, Edo, Delta, and it goes all the way down this way. Manufacturing, rivers, Edo, and it goes all the way this way. Agriculture is declining this way, right? Now, income profile of states. You have the very poor, the moderate, the fairly rich, and the rich, right? So you can take a look at them and make your decisions, right? Now, internally generated, you can see the difference here. You see Lagos, Rivers, Kano, Ogun, Edo, Oyo.